Ed.
Hey, Kim.
So we're now sitting here on our third episode of our Geared for Growth series, and we've explored some of the trends and topics that came out of the Roundtable series that we've hosted. And one of the topics that came out was around the knowledge gap and people's awareness of the funding landscape. So I thought we could talk through that and get each other's perspective and experiences as well. You speak to a lot of people. Is that a theme that comes out day to day as well? It just sticks in my mind from the roundtable that we did.
Yeah, I think the point that comes up the most is how much the funding landscape has changed. If you go back to the financial crash, prior to that, the banks made up a considerable proportion of SME lending. And if you look at where they are now, the banks focus on where they want to be, and it's left that gap, or the missing middle, as a lot of the funders call it. And different funding opportunities, different products have been launched over the years to fill those gaps. You've got different investors and lending institutions wanting to pick up certain pieces of that. So you've got almost more competition, a bit more fragmentation. And I think all of that leads to a more complex market for a business leader to understand. Before, I would talk to my bank or would talk to my accountant. Now it's actually, what is the right product for me? How do I approach that lender? How do I even know that lender exists, and what is it that they're looking for? The information requirements are very different now compared to where we were before, because you've got technology and a whole ocean of data that's available from a market perspective, but also on the actual business itself. And so I think that's probably where this challenge comes from, is that actually the marketplace has evolved so much, and it's very difficult for leaders to keep up with, actually, who do I need to talk to for what?
Yeah. And I guess if you think about it, to your point about people, their first port of call might have been the relationship manager at their bank. That was a natural first question to explore. And then if that's not viable, there's equity. So you've got the two ends of the spectrum. And the in-between bit, I have a huge amount of sympathy for companies, because you don't know what you don't know. If someone tells you these are all the different products, at least you are starting from an even playing ground of understanding what those products are. I guess for a lot of these companies, they don't even know these products exist. So therefore, who do they go to seek advice? Trusted advisors, trusted people in their network, their accountancy firms, maybe someone that they've met along the way who they know has raised funding. And to your point, using information resources. So whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Googling and landing upon different funding options and exploring them. But each of those people or outlets, there is an educational element to them. So for accountancy firms, for lawyers, these people that are perhaps the first port of call to explore funding, there is an opportunity for them to help educate and provide some of that initial advice as well.
Yeah, I think education was a key theme that came up, because again, I talked to a number of partners at different firms, and one partner may know growth lending exists and another partner may not know what we do at all, which we think is quite strange, but it just goes back to the way that we do business. Borrowing money is a reasoned purchase, and you will take advice from people that you trust. Word of mouth is probably stronger than direct marketing. And so getting out and educating people is really important for companies like us to be able to get the kind of traction and the audience that we're looking for. Otherwise, business owners will go to what they know. And if what they know doesn't know about options like us, it can be more challenging for them to get what they want.
Do you think that one of the issues is that there is a mix of confidence around what their options are in the market? And even if there isn't necessarily a knowledge gap, that they are aware of different products, how they then access those products or approach them, or what they need to do to prepare for that. How much do you think that is a factor, that confidence in fundraising or understanding what those different funding options are?
Yeah, I think they're two separate points, confidence and knowledge. And I think a lot of business leaders, especially those that really know their business and may be very emotionally attached to it, they will have the confidence to talk about their business. There's no better conversation to have with a business leader than about their actual business. And so actually, I think confidence is usually there. The knowledge gap is the issue, because from a business leader's perspective, the time that you spend trying to raise finance versus a professional that maybe has to come and do that for you? What is that opportunity cost? What are you able to do with that time back in your business by allowing someone else to focus on the fundraising element? And again, you only know what you know. So whilst you may believe that you're doing a good job or you've negotiated a good position, actually, if you've got no wider understanding of the general context of what might be achievable in the market, given that it's more fragmented than it used to be, you don't know what you don't know. And therefore, confidence is great. But I think if you don't have the experience, the first thing that you should ask yourself as a business leader is my skill set better elsewhere? And am I better bringing that skill set in from somewhere else to help me get what it is I'm looking to achieve?
Yeah. And that actually raises a good point around whether companies choose to use advisors or not. And the time it takes to explore funding options, to prepare all the information, go through a diligence process. In a small business, that's a big amount of time for a management team to commit to when they're day to day wanting to focus on running their business. So I think that access to that advisory network and trusted advisors, just to make sure that you're seeing the whole breadth of the marketplace as well. But equally, you still want to have an inherent understanding of what those advisors are telling you so that you do not feel that you're not in control of that process or the different options, that you have the confidence that you're making the right decision as a team, as a business leader, as a stakeholder for you, for your team, and that strategy that you're pursuing. There's an awful lot of different factors to take into account. So I can see why it can be quite overwhelming for teams. And equally, that's where I think having that knowledge and understanding brings confidence with it as well.
We talk about confidence in business leaders, but from a lender's perspective, as an experienced lender, are you more confident when there is an advisor on board, or are you less confident when a business leader approaches you directly?
Really good question. So I think I have had mixed experiences of both. In some ways, when you are introduced to a company directly, whether it's come through our website or some sort of call to action from our marketing, you're engaging directly with that management team. So maybe from day one, you're building a slightly closer relationship and you have access to the team immediately. The quality of the information that you then get is varied. So if you've got a serial entrepreneur or it's a sponsor-backed business, the quality of the information that you have typically sits more akin to what we're looking for, i.e. they know what our criteria is, they know what our process is going to be, all the way up the other end of the spectrum to have an advisor-led business. I've seen mixed quality
Yeah.
there as well. So I don't think there's a one size fits all. I think it's about the experience that those business leaders have and that team has, how many times they've been through a fundraising process versus is it the first time that they're approaching this and bringing in external capital. I think all of those factors paint the picture of what is right for that individual business, and not any one advisor is the right advisor for each and every business. Maybe it's a sector focus, maybe there is a niche understanding of that. I think it really depends. 75% of our introductions come through the advisory network. So it's obviously a really important source of deal flow for us. But within that, as I say, I think the quality of that information, as you'll see as well, is mixed.
Comes down to the knowledge gap. Maybe entrepreneurs are not aware of the type of information that we're looking for. Do you think that early engagement with a borrower is valuable, or do you think it detracts from a process?
I personally find it very helpful. However, there comes a point where having an intermediary can be advantageous, whether it's that initial information discovery phase, whether it's then the negotiation phase, and you have that person in the middle who, if you get a really good advisor who has a lot of experience, they can give good objective views on things. Oh, this is a term we see a lot in the market. This is not unusual. I think that context can really help some companies. But again, it comes back to that advisor and the experience that they have and the value add that they're bringing to that deal as well. I think the danger for companies, if they don't seek to address the knowledge gap that they have, is they will end up with products or financing solutions that are not solutions they create far more issues in the short term and in the long run. If I think of an example of a deal that I'm looking at the moment, there are lots of small bitty loans in there. They were probably right at a certain time in the company's growth, gave them access to capital. But now there are numerous facilities in that business that need to be aggregated to be refinanced into one manageable facility. But that potentially has quite big consequences for the company. They're managing, in this instance, 10 to 15 separate facilities. It might sound great. They're all unsecured, but some of them have got quite high interest rates attached to them. There are terms and facilities agreements that the company has to understand the implications of. When I look at it as a lender, it places a bit of a question mark about why they've raised this type of funding. Did it mean they couldn't access other things, or actually was it just easy at the time for them and actually it was the right thing to do? I think that there are implications of the wrong type of funding and products that have repercussions down the line. And that's why it's so important that management teams understand the products that they're entering into and how that can be looked outside in the market as well. Equally, if you don't raise funds, what are the opportunity costs of not doing that acquisition or not investing in your sales and marketing team? So I think there's always a trade-off between what can you do and the growth that you can achieve through organic growth versus bringing in external capital and using that to accelerate your strategy.
Yeah, I think financing, I'm always looking 3 to 5 years forward. Strategically, what does the finance mean for the business? How does this hold us back if we want to change course or we want to deploy cash to innovate? Setting up finance in the wrong way can be destructive. One of the challenges is that if you look back 3 or 5 years ago at companies that may have taken out financing 5 years ago, and of course we had COVID and you had an availability of loans under certain structures which were backed by the government, which was great for at the time. But what we found now is the world is a far more dynamic place, and these loans were not taken with the 5-year time horizon in mind. So actually there's a lot more refinancing activity that we're seeing out of needs must, because the world has changed. Now it's become more difficult to get that kind of strategic alignment right over 3 to 5 years because there are more products, there are more financial players, there's more uncertainty in the market, there's more challenges for businesses. And therefore, whilst it's right that at the time when you take out the borrowing, you get it right for what your 3 to 5 year strategy is, I think entrepreneurs also need to be able to adapt to whatever may happen and not be scared of refinancing, talking to your lender, getting in front of your advisor and seeing what else is in the market. Because what we've seen in the last 5 years is that market has shifted and that lenders like us had different appetites, different products available and different structures that are then topical for the environment that we find ourselves in. There is a cost, of course, to refinancing, a cost that may feel unnecessary, but actually sometimes that sunk cost to get yourself set up right for the future and then what you can actually do when you release the shackles is really important, I think, for business leaders.
It unlocks that ability to grow, to make that acquisition, to move forward. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you think people's understanding of debt, of raising leverage as a means to grow the business, do you think perceptions around that have changed? I ask because I've been at Boost now, growth lending, for 7, 8 years. And when I first started, when you talked to people about venture debt, it was a relatively unknown product, i.e., is it debt? Is it debt plus equity? Is it mezzanine? People didn't quite know where it sat in the market or what it was. Move on to where we are now, there are a whole range of products that sit within the debt space, and the landscape has grown dramatically, and that alternative lending market has expanded, which in itself is a positive. There's more options. But if we take the debt landscape first, how much do you think the expansion in that market has led to this knowledge gap or people's willingness to use debt as a product to grow their businesses?
Yeah, I think confidence plays a part in that, because if I'm a business owner that's always funded my business in a particular way, I'll stick to what I know. There's almost that security blanket with all the uncertainty in the world. It makes sense to stick to what you know. But sometimes I think what you're then missing is that opportunity of actually, is there a different way? Is there a more innovative way to approach this? Is there a different type of product that's available to me? If I'm a manufacturer, as an example, asset finance and invoice finance are my friends, because that's what I've had for many years. It's what the banks have told me. It's what the advisors have set up for me in the
Yeah.
past. But actually, there are alternative products available to businesses that are asset heavy or that have large working capital. There is still an ability to leverage other cash flows within that business, but also assets within the balance sheet that allow them to deploy capital to grow and to innovate as businesses themselves. So what I'm always trying to do is, again, that education piece is, well, okay, you may understand what you have already and that's great and that works for you, but what are the alternative options that are available, and do those work better? What opportunities do they create you? And therefore, what's in it in return for you?
Yeah. And that growth credit is not a negative, there's no negative connotation around it. It's a really viable product. And actually, at the right point in a company's growth trajectory, it's a powerful product because it can minimize dilution and can sit alongside equity and work in combination with one another. So I think those type of situations that people have to understand, and again, going back to it, what's right for them.
Yeah, growth credit is buying power, as I've seen in the past. If you know you have the capital behind you to go out and negotiate a strong deal, buy something for cash at a discount, whatever it might be, I think sometimes having that cash behind you can give you the confidence to go out and grow. It's a bit of a chicken and egg. It's like, well, do I grow first and then get the capital, which has always been the traditional way of financing a business. And some might say the safer way of financing a business. But in a very kind of innovative world where entrepreneurs want to push businesses forward, there are lenders out there like growth lending that will take a view on what it is that you're doing, the strategy that you're implementing, actually putting that credit in behind you to propel that opportunity so that you can go forward and achieve your goals.
So
Cool.
what is clear is that there is a knowledge gap that varies depending on various different things. Different management teams have different experiences, have different knowledge. Advisors themselves have different views of the market, but there is one. And therefore, the obvious question for me is, how do we address that? And what part can we play in that? What would be a good step to enhancing that knowledge?
Yeah, I think the outreach that we do as a lender is really important. Some of the challenges I find is that outreach will depend on whether someone wants to listen to it. I think the world is full of so many messages in so many different formats through so many different applications. It's really difficult to digest and for it to actually land, resonate, and then for someone to be able to pick that up later and use it at a time when it's really needed. So I think the outreach is really important. I guess the question for me is whether an entrepreneur needs to know absolutely everything about every single lending institution that's out there. Because again, if I'm running a business, my focus is on running my business. The question is whether the outreach needs to be directly to borrowers, which I think it does to some extent, but also really the education perhaps needs to be more around who do you surround yourself with as an entrepreneur, so that you've got a real kind of diversification of skill sets, knowledge around the table, and it's been able to take that on and having the flexibility to sit back and being humble enough to say, I don't know everything about this. You, Mr. Board Member, you've done some deals in the past, different financing structures, you've raised private equity. I'm going to listen to you for the welcome to the table. So I think what's really important for me, and when I talk to entrepreneurs, is I'm always trying to understand, who have you got that works around you? What does your professional network look like? Because if you're only talking to the same people and they only have the same interests as you, you're not really learning much. You're all just fueling what you already know. I implore people to challenge themselves, bring on someone really different who challenges your way of thinking, bring something different to the table, because then I think you learn a little bit more. Education more broadly is a challenge for the entire sector. You sometimes reflect on, is it down to me as a lender to educate my network as to exactly what I can do? should I be educating my network on everything that I know about other places that I've worked or other businesses that I've worked with and other lenders that I know exist? So I think there's this whole kind of sector issue. You've got government bodies, British Business Bank. Again, it's on them to educate through their channels what is available to businesses because it's become more fragmented. There are more products. There are more lenders out there. It's a really dynamic environment. And strangely, it's not just a domestic environment anymore. There's an international market for equity, venture debt, growth credit. We've seen a lot of European funds start to make investments into the UK as well. So now that education needs to be quite far reaching, but I think from my perspective, it's the responsibility of not just us as lending institutions, but also wider professional networks, regulators, banks, and government to ensure that entrepreneurs have access at every level to the funding they need to move business forward.
I sometimes wonder as well, given the access to information that companies have, sometimes they can just be awash with information as well, actually. And I've known management teams say, we've done all of this research. These management teams, they are experienced. They do want the best for their business and they do all the research in the background. But there is such a vast ocean of information for them that then it becomes quite difficult to filter all of that, look at the differentiators, look at the implications, understand that. And that's where it comes back to your point that once you've got that information, how do you then filter that down? That is talking to your board, talking to your non-execs, appointing the right advisor for your business. I think that's the bit sometimes it's almost like the analysis of that information. They have it all. There's a vast quantity, but then what do they do with that? How do they break that down? How do they work out what is right for them? There's various challenges and there's not a one size fits all or one reason why there is a knowledge gap or why that exists. There are various stages of overcoming that. And I think it's the combination of those things that we can work on to make a simpler, less onerous and perhaps intimidating process for some of these companies.
Do you find sometimes that when information that's shared, do you find that the recipient of that may take it in different ways? And information is what it is at its source, but the context of the reader and how it might land with them can create a different point of view. So do you think sometimes that information or too much information actually is problematic?
I think it can be. I think it's a very similar point that sometimes you can, because day in, day out, we're talking about our facilities, our products, it's second nature to us. And for some of our borrowers, it's second nature to them as well. They've been through various processes. For other people, this is really new and they are at a different stage in that journey. So I think what's really important is to understand the experience of that team and then flex the information and the communication style to make sure that those points are landing and to break it down in a way that is digestible and understandable and relevant to that particular business as well, because people will have different concerns. If we look at debt generally, people may have had an experience where they've had a debt facility in the past and they've breached a covenant and it's caused them issues and they're very concerned about that. So you might then need to spend time explaining how our financial covenants and operating covenants work. You might have another company who are very comfortable with the reporting requirements and governance environment for them, but may have a concern over the due diligence process or the use of those funds. So I think taking the time to understand what's important to each borrower or each potential borrower is very helpful in making that communication then eloquent and hit home for that person, and you're addressing their concerns or their particular information gaps.